Welcome to today's deep dive, where we're going to be tackling a really interesting question. Does a high IQ actually guarantee good decision making?
Yeah.
I mean, we often hear that smart people make better choices, but is it really that straightforward? We'll be looking at the complex relationship between intelligence and the decisions we make and going beyond that simple assumption.
Yeah, it's definitely not as clear-cut as it might seem at first glance, and it's a topic that's worth really digging into, especially when you consider cases like Kary Mullis.
Kieran Paulus, okay.
So he was a Nobel Prize-winning scientist who made incredible breakthroughs, in DNA technology, but he also publicly advocated against things like climate change and questioned the link between HIV and AIDS.
Oh, wow.
Interesting. So it makes you wonder, if such a brilliant scientist can hold beliefs that some might see as irrational, what does that really tell us about the connection between, having a high IQ and actually making smart choices in real life?
It definitely challenges that idea that intelligence just automatically equals good judgment in every single area, right? Like, does it mean that anyone with a high IQ could also be prone to believing in conspiracy theories or making impulsive financial decisions or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing we're talking about. And it really highlights the limitations of just using IQ as the sole measure of intelligence.
Okay.
Like traditional IQ tests mainly focus on analytical intelligence, which is basically the ability to solve well-defined problems that have clear right or wrong answers.
Yeah, like textbook problems.
Exactly. But life, as we know, is rarely that neat and tidy, right?
Yeah, definitely not. So it's more like, you could be great at those textbook problems, but then struggle when it comes to like navigating relationships or making decisions under pressure when there's not a clear-cut solution.
Precisely. And this brings us to the idea of dysrationalia.
Okay, dysrationality, what is that?
So this term basically describes the phenomenon where someone can be incredibly intelligent in certain areas like, let's say, scientific reasoning, but at the same time, they can exhibit irrationality in other aspects of their life.
Oh, that's fascinating. So it's like having a superpower in one area, but then kind of a blind spot in others.
Yeah, you could say that. And it's a good reminder that intelligence, as we traditionally measure it, might be a much narrower concept than we often assume.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Now I want to shift gears for a moment and talk about something I've always been curious about, Louis Terman and his study of the termites.
Ah, yes, the termite.
Can you tell us more about that study and what it revealed about the relationship between intelligence and life outcomes?
Yeah, so Terman identified children with exceptionally high IQs. They were like, the top 1%. And he tracked them for decades to see how their intelligence would play out in their lives. The idea was to see if their high IQs would lead to success in all areas.
So did it? Did these genius kids all grow up to live happy and successful lives?
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Mm-hmm.
The results were actually much more nuanced.
Yeah.
Like, while some of these termites did achieve remarkable things, they became successful scientists, entrepreneurs, artists, others actually struggled with things like relationships, career choices, even personal fulfillment. Their high IQs didn't magically solve all of life's problems or protect them from making bad decisions.
It sounds like there's more to the equation than just raw intelligence, right?
Right.
It's kind of like having all the ingredients for delicious cake, but not knowing how to bake it.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. And it leads us to the work of Robert Sternberg.
Okay, Robert Sternberg.
He's a psychologist who proposed the triarchic theory of intelligence, which basically says that there are actually three distinct types of intelligence: analytical, creative, and practical.
So analytical is the one that IQ tests usually measure, right?
That's right. And it's about your ability to analyze information, solve problems logically, and think critically.
Okay, what about the other two? What are creative and practical intelligence?
Right. So creative intelligence is the ability to come up with new ideas, solve problems in novel ways, to think outside the box.
Okay, creative folks, got it.
And practical intelligence is more about what people call street smarts.
Okay.
It's about your ability to adapt to your environment, read social cues, understand unspoken rules, and find solutions to real-world problems that don't always have clear-cut solutions.
I see. So it's like someone with high practical intelligence might not necessarily ace an academic test, but they would thrive in a fast-paced work environment or in social situations where they need to think on their feet and make quick decisions.
Yeah, that's a great example. They're the ones who can figure out how to get things done effectively in everyday life.
That makes a lot of sense. And now I'm really curious to learn more about this practical intelligence.
Yeah.
Is it something we're born with, or can we actually develop those skills over time?
That's a great question, and one we'll explore further in this deep dive. But the good news is that practical intelligence is something that can be learned and honed through experience, reflection, and deliberate practice.
Oh, that's reassuring. So it's not like we're stuck with a fixed level of street smarts.
Yeah,
We can actually work on becoming more resourceful and adaptable problem solvers.
absolutely. And as we go deeper into this topic, we'll uncover specific strategies and techniques that can help you develop your practical intelligence and become a more effective decision maker in all areas of your life.
That sounds amazing. But before we move on to those strategies, I want to touch on another fascinating aspect of this whole intelligence and decision-making thing, the so-called curse of expertise.
Oh, yeah, the curse of expertise.
Is it really true that having too much knowledge can actually hinder our ability to make good decisions? I mean, it seems counterintuitive, but could that be a real thing?
It's definitely something to consider, because it challenges that assumption that experts always make the best choices. As we'll see, there are situations where too much knowledge combined with certain cognitive biases can actually lead to some surprisingly poor decisions.
I'm already starting to see how much more nuanced and complex this relationship between intelligence and decision-making is than we might initially assume. But can you give me a real-world example of this curse of expertise? Like, how does it actually play out?
Well, consider Arthur Conan Doyle.
Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes.
The very same. In his writing, he really emphasized logic deduction, the importance of evidence.
Right. He created this brilliant detective who solves mysteries using pure reason.
Exactly. But in his personal life, Doyle became deeply involved in spiritualism and even believed in fairies.
Wait, really? That seems so paradoxical. Here's this mind that's capable of crafting these intricate mysteries and championing rational thinking. Yet at the same time, it embraces beliefs that, well, to put it mildly, seem a little illogical.
Yeah, it really highlights the power of what psychologists call motivated reasoning.
Motivated reasoning, okay.
It's that tendency we all have to cherry pick information and twist logic to fit our pre-existing beliefs, even when those beliefs are contradicted by evidence.
So even highly intelligent people can fall prey to this kind of biased thinking.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, it can be even more pronounced in experts who have spent years building their reputations on a particular set of beliefs.
It's like they're so invested in their ideas that they can't even see the evidence that contradicts them.
Precisely. And it's not just individual experts who can fall into this trap either. It can also happen in organizations where groupthink and the pressure to conform can stifle dissent and lead to some pretty disastrous decisions.
Okay, so if even experts can be blinded by their own knowledge and biases, how can the rest of us avoid these pitfalls and make more rational choices? It feels like a minefield out there.
That's where intellectual humility comes in. It's kind of like the antidote to this curse of expertise, and it's a key ingredient in making sound judgments.
Intellectual humility. Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. Tell me more about what that is and how you can help us navigate all this complexity.
Yeah. So intellectual humility is the ability to acknowledge that we don't know everything, to recognize our own biases and be open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
So it's kind of the opposite of being arrogant or closed-minded. Like being willing to admit when we don't have all the answers.
Exactly. It's about approaching knowledge with curiosity, and being open to learning from others, even those who might have different views than our own.
That makes sense. But it still sounds a little abstract. Like, how do we actually cultivate this intellectual humility in a practical way?
One really effective way is to actively seek out different perspectives. Instead of just surrounding ourselves with people who always agree with us, we need to engage with those who challenge our assumptions and make us think differently.
Like, get out of our echo chambers and expose ourselves to a wider range of ideas, even if they make us a little uncomfortable sometimes.
Precisely. And this applies not just to the people we interact with, but also to the information we consume. We need to be critical of what we read and hear, especially online, and be willing to question even those sources we might generally consider trustworthy.
So it's about being more discerning with the information we take in not just blindly accepting everything we come across, especially in this age of social media and information overload.
Absolutely. And that's where critical thinking skills become so important. It's about asking questions, evaluating evidence, and considering different interpretations before we form an opinion.
Speaking of critical thinking, it's funny you mentioned that because I recently fell victim to something called the Moses illusion.
The Moses illusion, a classic.
Someone asked me, how many animals of each kind did Moses take on the ark? And without even thinking, I said 2. And it wasn't until later that I realized, wait a minute, it was Noah, not Moses, who built the ark.
It's amazing how easily we can be misled even when the information contradicts our basic knowledge, right?
It really is. And it makes me realize how important it is to slow down, pay attention, and not just accept things at face value, no matter how convincingly they're presented.
Right, and this is particularly crucial in today's world, where misinformation and fake news can spread so rapidly online. We need to be vigilant about checking sources, verifying information, and not falling for content that's designed to manipulate our emotions or mislead us.
It seems like cultivating both intellectual humility and critical thinking skills are essential for navigating the digital age and making sound decisions in a world that's saturated with information.
Absolutely. Now let's shift gears for a moment and talk about another factor that can influence our choices, often in very subtle and surprising ways.
Emotions.
Okay, emotions. We tend to think of emotions as the enemy of rational decision making, but I'm guessing you're going to tell me that's not always the case.
You got it. Antonio Damasio, a neuroscientist who's done a lot of groundbreaking work in this area, proposes something called the somatic marker hypothesis.
Okay, the somatic marker hypothesis. What is that exactly? It suggests that our gut feelings, those physical sensations we experience, like a racing heart or butterflies in our stomach, can actually serve as warning signals or guideposts in our decision making.
So our bodies are actually sending us signals that our conscious minds might not be aware of.
Exactly. These somatic markers are based on our past experiences, and they can alert us to potential dangers or opportunities even before we've had a chance to fully process the situation intellectually.
That makes me think of a time when I had a job interview. Logically, it seemed like a great opportunity, but I had this nagging feeling of unease, like a tightness in my chest. I ignored it, took the job, and it turned out to be a terrible fit. Looking back, I wish I had listened to that gut feeling.
That's a perfect example of how our bodies can sometimes pick up on subtle cues that our conscious minds miss. But of course, we also need to be careful not to misinterpret those somatic markers.
That's true. So how do we learn to tell the difference between a helpful gut feeling and just say indigestion? How do we become more attuned to our emotions and use them effectively in our decision making?
Well, this is where emotional granularity comes in.
Emotional granularity, okay.
It's the ability to accurately label and differentiate between our feelings. This helps us understand where those feelings are coming from and regulate their influence on our choices and behaviors.
So instead of just saying, I feel bad, we need to be more specific and identify whether it's sadness, anxiety, anger, or something else.
Exactly. The more nuanced our emotional vocabulary is, the better equipped we are to understand the root causes of our feelings and make conscious choices about how to respond to them.
Sounds like emotional granularity is a key component of emotional intelligence.
It is, and emotional intelligence, as you know, plays a crucial role in making sound decisions, building strong relationships, and navigating the complexities of social interactions.
Absolutely. So we've talked about intellectual humility, critical thinking, and emotional intelligence. Those all seem essential for making good choices. But what about when we're making decisions as part of a group? Do these same principles still apply?
That's a great question, and it brings us to the concept of collective intelligence.
Hmm.
It's the idea that groups of people, even if they're not all experts, can often make better decisions than individuals thanks to the combined knowledge and perspectives of the group.
So it's like the old saying, two heads are better than one.
Precisely, and there's actually a lot of research to back that up. Groups can be surprisingly good at solving problems, making predictions, even generating creative ideas. They can often outperform even the smartest person in the group.
That makes sense. But we've also seen how groups can sometimes make terrible decisions. Like when groupthink takes over. How do we harness the wisdom of the crowd without falling into those traps?
That's where the work of Anita Woolley comes in.
Anita Woolley.
She's a researcher who's studied collective intelligence extensively, and she's identified several key factors that contribute to a group's ability to make good decisions.
I'm all ears. What are the secrets to unlocking collective intelligence?
Well, one crucial ingredient is social sensitivity, which is closely related to emotional intelligence. Groups that can effectively read each other's emotions, communicate clearly, and build trust and rapport tend to perform better.
So it's not just about having a bunch of smart people in the room. It's also about having people who can work well together.
Exactly. And this relates to another important factor: equal participation. In the most successful groups, everyone feels comfortable sharing their ideas, regardless of their status or expertise. It's about creating a level playing field where all voices are heard and valued.
It makes me think of the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team. That group of underdog college players who defeated the seemingly invincible Soviet team. They weren't necessarily the most individually talented players, but they had incredible teamwork and a shared belief in themselves.
That's a fantastic example. Their Miracle on Ice victory is a testament to the power of collective intelligence, when individuals are willing to put their egos aside and work together towards a common goal.
So social sensitivity and equal participation, those are key. What else contributes to effective group decision-making?
Another crucial factor is having a balance of different skills and perspectives. Diversity of thought is essential for preventing groupthink and coming up with truly innovative solutions.
It's like having a well-rounded team where each member brings their unique strengths and experiences to the table.
Exactly. When you have people from different backgrounds with different areas of expertise and ways of thinking, you're much more likely to generate creative ideas and avoid getting stuck in a rut.
This all makes so much sense, but creating this kind of collaborative and open-minded environment seems like a tall order, especially in a workplace setting.
It definitely takes conscious effort both from leaders and individual team members, but the benefits are well worth it.
I'd love to hear more about how we can actually foster these conditions in organizations. Are there specific leadership styles or organizational structures that can promote collective intelligence?
That's a great question, and it leads us into the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore the organizational factors that can either enhance or hinder intelligent decision-making.
Okay, so we're going to be diving into the world of organizational dynamics and how they impact decision-making. This is getting really interesting. So we've talked about how important collective intelligence is for organizations and how teams can make better decisions together. But I'm really curious about the organizational side of things, like, what kind of leadership styles or structures can actually make or break a team's ability to make those smart choices?
Yeah, that's a really important question, and one of the most critical factors is psychological safety.
Psychological safety, okay.
It basically means creating an environment where people feel comfortable speaking up, sharing their ideas, and admitting mistakes, without fear of being punished or humiliated.
It's that feeling of trust and respect, right? Where
Right.
you won't be penalized for voicing a different opinion or pointing out a potential problem.
Exactly. And research shows that organizations with high levels of psychological safety tend to be more innovative, adaptable, and resilient. They're able to catch errors early on and prevent them from escalating into bigger issues because people aren't afraid to raise concerns.
It's like in those disaster movies, where everyone sees the warning signs, but they're too afraid to speak up and challenge the person in charge. In a psychologically safe environment, those red flags would be addressed right away.
Exactly. And this ties into another important element, a willingness to embrace dissent.
I've always thought of dissent as a negative thing, like something that disrupts harmony and creates conflict.
It can be if it's not handled constructively, but healthy dissent, where people feel comfortable expressing different viewpoints and challenging assumptions, is actually essential for avoiding groupthink and making well-informed decisions.
So it's about recognizing that conflict, when it's handled respectfully and with a shared goal in mind, can actually lead to better solutions.
Absolutely. And leaders have a crucial role to play in fostering this kind of culture. They need to actively encourage open dialogue, seek out diverse perspectives, and create a safe space for people to voice their concerns without fear of reprisal.
It's about leading with intellectual humility, recognizing that no one has all the answers.
Precisely. And it also ties into a commitment to learning and continuous improvement.
That reminds me of the growth mindset we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
The idea that we can always learn and improve rather than seeing setbacks as personal failures.
Exactly. Organizations that foster a growth mindset tend to be more adaptable, innovative, and resilient because they see mistakes as opportunities to learn and get better.
So that learning-oriented approach needs to be present at every level of the organization from the top down.
Absolutely. From the CEO to frontline employees, everyone needs to feel empowered to learn, grow, and contribute their ideas.
And that brings us to another important factor: transparency and open communication.
Right. Transparency is key for building trust and making sure that everyone has access to the information they need to make those informed decisions. And it's not just about sharing information, but also about being open about the decision-making process itself.
So instead of decisions being made behind closed doors, organizations should try to involve employees in the process and explain the reasoning behind their choices.
Exactly. This not only increases buy-in and accountability, but it also allows employees to learn from the process and contribute their own perspectives.
It's about creating a culture of shared ownership and responsibility.
Precisely. And this transparency and open communication should extend beyond the internal workings of the organization. It should also include being open and honest with customers, stakeholders, and the public.
Okay, so all of this sounds fantastic in theory, but are there any real-world examples of companies that have successfully implemented these principles?
There are, actually, and one company that often comes up as a model is Google.
Google, that's interesting. I know they're known for their innovative products and services, but I hadn't really thought of them as a role model for organizational culture.
It might seem surprising, but they've consistently ranked as one of the best companies to work for, and a big part of their success is their strong organizational culture, which really emphasizes things like psychological safety, transparency, open communication, and a commitment to learning and growth.
So they're not just hiring brilliant people, they're also creating an environment where those people can thrive and do their best work.
Exactly. And this culture of intellectual humility, open communication, and continuous learning has really allowed them to stay ahead of the curve in such a rapidly changing industry.
It's inspiring to see that these principles can work in practice and lead to real-world success.
It is, and while Google is an exceptional case, there are many other organizations, both big and small, that are embracing these principles and seeing the positive results.
So it's not just about having a nice-sounding mission statement or a list of values on the wall. It's about actually putting those values into practice
Yeah.
in every decision and interaction.
Precisely. And by fostering a culture that supports intelligent decision-making organizations can create a more engaged, productive, and innovative workforce.
This has been an incredible journey. We've covered so much ground, from the limits of IQ to the wisdom of the crowd to the power of organizational culture.
It's been a whirlwind tour of the human mind and all the fascinating ways we make decisions.
I feel like I've gained some serious insights into how to make better choices both in my personal life and at work.
That's great to hear. And remember, it's an ongoing process. There's always more to learn and new challenges to navigate.
That's true, but I feel much more equipped to handle those challenges now. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. What will you do differently tomorrow based on what you've learned today? How will you use this knowledge to make a positive impact on the world? It's a question worth pondering.
It really is. And for myself, I'm going to focus on cultivating even greater intellectual humility, recognizing my own biases, and actively seeking out different perspectives. I encourage all of our listeners to do the same. Embrace curiosity, never stop learning, and strive to make choices that benefit not only yourselves, but also the world around you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of intelligence and decision-making. We hope you've enjoyed the journey, and we'll see you next time.